Welcome to Cut the COVID Crap part 48. How can you claim vaccinating children is safe and effective? I'm discussing a recent Singapore study. T-shirt of the week. Support mandatory vaccination, then you give up a kidney just to protect others, of course. And just to be clear, I'm not against vaccination. Um, I'm just against mandatory vaccination. Um, so the Singapore study. To start with, all the credit to John Campbell. He picked up this Singapore study from 2 days ago, July 20th, and discusses it in his YouTube video called Adverse Events in 5 to 11-year-olds. So all credit to him, because the study itself, I read it. Of course, the links are below. The study itself has the standard conclusions. Vaccinations help basically against infection and hospitalization. Um, but if you look in the details of the studies, there's much more to say about the risk benefit, which is, of course, the question that you should ask yourself when you vaccinate yourself or your children. Um, and that's what John Campbell does well. Um, he is pro-vaccination in general, but he looks at the risk reward. His link is below as well. Anyway, so in a nutshell, the Singapore study is about 250,000 children in the 5 to 11-year-old age group. Roughly 20 to 25% is not vaccinated. So out of the 250,000, 288 get hospitalized in the end, or as a result of COVID. So the study shows an effectiveness of against infection of about 50% and a higher percentage against hospitalization. So and that in itself is something that you have to be aware of, right? I mean, if you say vaccination is effective, what do you mean by effective? Because like the bar for effectiveness in vaccinations used to be 50%. If it was less than 50%, then the vaccination producers are going to be sent back to the drawing board. Like, okay, find a better one because this is not good enough. So they show it's roughly 50% effectiveness against vaccination, and it wanes very quickly on top of that. So anyway, that's the effectiveness part. But so roughly you get 1 in 1,000 go to hospital, and the kids being sent to hospital, the vast majority is precautionary. And you could even argue, like, is an unvaccinated kid gonna be sent quicker to hospital than a vaccinated kid? I mean, you don't know. That's impossible to find out. Um, Probably if I would not vaccinate my kid and he's got severe symptoms, I'd probably be more keen to take him to hospital than if he was vaccinated and there's nothing much you can do about it anyway or something. Anyway, that's subjective. But anyway, roughly 1 in 1,000 end up at hospital. The vast majority is released, again, because it's precautionary. What is important is 5 kids need oxygen. So 5 out of those hospitalized kids, which is 1 in 50,000 kids in the sample. So 1 in 50,000 ends up on oxygen in hospital. Out of those 5 kids, only 1 of them was unvaccinated. But remember, the vaccinated was 20 to 25% of the population, so that's in line with so the chances are the same, vaccinated or not, based on this small number, because that number is of course very small. And out of the 5 on oxygen, 4 um, ended up in the ICU, in intensive care. Now, I would, I mean, I think that the vaccination, I believe that the vaccination helps against hospitalization. I mean, you got something that looks a little bit like the virus, so yeah, I would expect it protects a little bit. So I'm more than happy to go along that side of the narrative. And despite ICU wise, there's no difference, hospitalized or not. These are very small numbers. I I I would also believe that the chance of a severe outcome like ICU is less if you're vaccinated. The data don't show it, but I believe that if the hospitalization is lower, then likely the severe cases are lower as well. But what I also believe, and again, there's no proof in these data, but what I also believe is like probably the severe cases are more linked to comorbidities than vaccination status. No data to prove that, but like in younger kids, of course, obesity doesn't happen as much there as in older kids. And this is a Singapore study, and on the top of my head, I believe the obesity in Singapore is much lower than in the Western world as well. Anyway, what is relevant for ICU? Yeah, again, I think it's more. There's no evidence for vaccination status making a difference. Um, uh, I Based on what I've seen before, I think obesity is a much more influential factor. Anyway, that's 5 out of 250,000. So that's 1 in 50,000 ends up in ICU. 1 in 50,000. In the same article, they don't give it much attention. John Campbell does, but yeah, I read the article as well. In the same article, it shows that 22 of them have a severe adverse reaction on the vaccine. 22 out of 250,000. So that's 1 in 10,000. And that's not a normal adverse reaction, a severe one. So of a type of myocarditis. I assume they don't specify it here, but I assume it's that or something like that. And if you get myocarditis, usually you're released out of the hospital pretty soon. But the problem is you got scar tissue, and it's like scar tissue on your heart or the pericarditis, the sac around your heart, that stays for a long time. So you have there's long-term implications. How to measure that is hard to tell. We will only find out in a couple of years, I guess. But this is where the risk reward kicks in, and that's what you have to determine for yourself. I mean, given these data, if these averages are representative, and it's a large sample, 250,000, so again, 1 in 10,000 chance of ending up in on oxygen, and vaccinated or not doesn't seem to matter in that case, um, versus 1 in 10,000 that you have a severe adverse reaction. It's both small numbers. You got to realize that it's the chance that something goes wrong because you contracted COVID as a kid is small. The chance of something wrong happening because of the vaccination is small as well. But still, it's 1 in 50,000 versus, and the one like none of them died, right? All of the kids when it went out of the ICU. But yeah, like to me, I mean, like you should assume that all the kids, everybody is going to get COVID anyway. I mean, you would really have to lock yourself up if you want to make sure that you don't get COVID. So even though vaccination, I do believe vaccinations do help to to get a lower chance of contracting it, but eventually you're going to get it anyway. So if you look at the particular time period, there may be, I believe that there's a smaller chance of getting it, but if it's over a long period, yeah, you're going to get it sooner or later anyway. Again, unless you lock yourself up with, and I'm not willing to do that with such small hospitalization rates. So you know, if you look at these data, you could say like, yeah, there's a one in 1,000 chance that kid ends up in the hospital, and that's more for the vaccinated than the unvaccinated. If that's the measure you want to go by, fair enough. But you got to realize most of them are going to be released from hospital anyway. So I care personally, decide for yourself, but I care personally more about the in terms of benefit side, like okay, intensive care. That's when it gets serious. Um, yeah, and then again, these data don't show any difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated. Small number, granted, but again, I think it's probably more related to obesity or other comorbidities. But I have a problem with the 22 severe adverse reactions. The 1 in 10,000 severe adverse reactions, not normal adverse reactions, severe adverse reactions. 1 in 10,000, and this is based on 2 shots. If in order to keep your risk low, given the waning of the vaccination, if you have to get a repeat shot, yeah, then I would assume that the adverse reactions are gonna add up. So yeah, if I have children that age range, do I want to expose them to a 1 in 10,000 chance of getting in severe adverse reactions every couple of months? Yeah, and a 1 in 50,000 of a ICU. But yeah, I think like if you go to the ICU, of course it's scary, but if you survive it, and it is just COVID, you survive it. Um, that compared to a severe adverse reaction like myocarditis, which stays a longer time, you should make up your own opinion on this, but you cannot claim this is safe. I mean, it's at least subjective, and what safety is yeah, that's up to you. I mean, you can say like there's only a 10% chance that things go wrong, and I find that safe. Yeah, uh, it's up to you. But if you look at the most negative outcomes for infection and the most negative outcomes for vaccination and the chances, yeah, um, I cannot call this safe, but make up your own mind. This is for 5 to 11-year-olds, and in earlier studies, I discussed them in way before already. Uh, the most severe vaccination side effects were in boys, young boys around the 15-year age group mark, but uh, likely not many studies have been done in younger age groups because the younger age groups have not been allowed to get vaccinated until relatively recently, depending on the country. By the way, this study was done on with data from January to April 2022 this year. So this is finally we got some data that relate to Omicron, very recent Omicron. So forget about Delta. That's a different beast. There, the risk benefit may very well be different. But we're talking about the recent times. Omicron. This is the most. It's a good study, as in high numbers. It's published in the New England Journal of Medicine. Um, quite reputable. But yeah, Um, I think if you extrapolate that to both younger age groups and older age groups, yeah, uh, decide for yourself what you think of the risk reward. Um, do your own research, but this is a good one to go by. Good luck, and I'll see you next week probably.